I suggested in the last lecture module that human beings are particularly adept at creating and utilizing large, diverse, and complex information ecosystems, and that this is, at least in part, the reason why human beings have thrived, particularly since the beginning of the Neolithic period about 10,200 years ago or so. But what exactly am I referring to when I talk about an information ecosystem? Let's give a couple of different definitions or ways of talking about what an information ecosystem is, particularly for human beings, but just generally. So an information ecosystem consists of a set of sources, of senses, of artifacts, of organizations and individuals that one regularly consults to gather information or evaluate claims, estimate likelihoods, or just when pondering the adequacy of one's worldview. Now I should introduce a sort of cautionary note here, because when I talk about information here, I'm not equating information with true data, or with belief even, or even with knowledge. Information, as I'm using it in these chapters, refers neutrally to sort of data gathered regardless of its truth or evidential basis whatsoever. So when I talk about information ecosystem, I'm just talking about gathering data, whether that data is accurate, inaccurate, well evinced, not well evinced, and so on. Another way to think about an information ecosystem is as follows. All living creatures inhabit an informational environment, just as they inhabit a biological or physical environment. The types of information available to an organism, the manner of that availability, and the ease of the access define this informational environment for some specific organism. The generation, consumption, and utilization and exchange of information in these information environments constitutes that creature's information ecosystem. So all creatures have an information ecosystem, a way of interacting with their informational environment in the same way that they have ambulatory mechanisms and so on, so that they can interact with their biological environment. I don't assign the very brief history of the roughly 1.2 billion years of evolution of information ecosystems in living creatures, but I do want to give you a little bit of a sort of summary to give you a sense of why it is that human beings are particularly adept at this creation and utilization of information ecosystems. So in that history that I present in the parts of that first chapter that I don't assign for this class, what I suggest is that when you look at the evolutionary history of life, what you see is that there is increased thriving corresponding with the development of increased reliability of information gathering sources. So, for example, in the Cambrian period, we see the development of sensory systems, and these sensory systems are more reliable than just these single isolated biomechanical mechanisms of irritability. And this causes an explosion of life. It also increases the amount of information that an organism in that Cambrian period could have about its environment, because, for example, vision allows you to go beyond the surface of your skin and gather information from reflected or projected light in the distal visual environment. It also allows you to paint a picture of the environment, which means that the amount of information that you have is increased, but also the complexity of the interrelationships between the information that you have available increases. And all of these things, reliability, sheer quantity, complexity, all of these things, when they increase, increase thriving. Vision in particular, but also olfaction, audition, other types of sensory systems, as well as early social information sharing mechanisms, increase the range of information complexity. That is, how far away can I gather information? What's my informational environment's size? And also the temporal duration. How much can I know about what's happened before the current moment? How much can I know about what's happening now? And so these increases also were associated with increased thriving. And in particular, when we think about increasing the range of information complexity, the development of spoken and then written languages dramatically increases the amount of information that can be shared across generations for humans in the last, say, 50 or 100,000 years, for instance. Increasing the speed of transmission of information, so how quickly information can be exchanged amongst individuals who are sharing information. This dramatically increases thriving in human beings. For instance, the development of means of transmitting information through the telegraph, through radio transmissions, so increasing the sources and participation in your information ecosystem. So not only did human beings manage to increase the speed with which they exchanged information, but there was a slow increase over time, for instance, through the development of trade, that allowed human beings to gather information from larger and larger areas, include more and more individuals, more and more diversity of individuals within their information network. And this, too, caused an increase in thriving. Finally, a diversity of information sources, so multiple sensory modalities, multiple kinds of individuals, multiple modalities of information storage and retrieval. Right? All of these sorts of increases in diversity are also associated in human beings with dramatic increases in human thriving. So human beings, more than any other creatures on the planet, are capable of gathering together and utilizing tremendous amounts of information from diverse sources, from diverse participants in different kinds of modalities. It gets transmitted to them essentially at the speed of light. The amount of information, as we'll see, both in terms of the range of the human information environment, as well as the temporal duration of information that they have access to, is just staggering at this point. Human beings just far and away blow away any other life form on the planet when it comes to creating these complex and thriving information ecosystems.